What should I focus on when studying? Or making notes? Like what chapters? Yeah, I started some of the videos.
Maybe 7 or 8.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, because I had trouble with the numbers, to get the numbers for the sentences. Because the website is changed.
Only your
Both of the sentences and dialects. So I had to, like, Google it. I spent a lot of time with that.
And that's for sessions 4 and 5, right? For quiz?
Yeah.
I think I finished 4.
Italian?
Watching the videos and the assignments. I gotta start 5, so I can do that tomorrow. Val? Are you?
Oh, you should get this.
Really?
You should get this.
You good, man?
That's Dr.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about
Yeah, that's the whole computer. Finance. Pero mejorar es más grande.
Yeah, I'm thinking 3. I think 3. Yeah.
Should we pull for Excel in?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, oh, no, no, no.
This is a new course, right?
What?
This is a new course for this?
Yep.
Yeah, you can just, the school director.
Yeah.
Hey Maria, you sitting here next to me?
Yeah, well, you're sitting next to me, actually, I was here first.
How fun is that? That's my class. How have you
20
been?
minutes is not a long time.
How have you been?
Okay, I've got 12:30, so it's time to get started. All right, pull up the spreadsheet that I sent to you via email. You should have it in your Nova email. There's a blank version that we will be modifying. didn't get a syllabus or the handout, let me know. And once again, just pull up the spreadsheet, should look just like this.
How long ago did you send it?
I thought yesterday.
Yesterday about 2 o'clock.
Okay, let's see, who is here? Okay, Gayon, I think I saw you. Carlos is here. Eduardo is here. Jarvis, are you here? Don't see Jarvis. Okay, Christina Gibbons. Chanel, there you are. Katarina? Nope.
Blackboard?
Lewis is here. Pam's here. Dustin, you here? Nope. Michelle?
Here.
Okay. Daniel Ponce? Yep. Marielle is here. Kristen Zuplo? She's not here, is she? Okay. Andreas is here. Jesus. And Kenneth is over there. Yep. Okay, everybody can spreadsheet open?
No, wait.
No, it starts to log in if someone else is logged in.
I mean, I can see you guys.
I know it takes a minute and we'll change over, but. You got it?
Appreciate it.
All right, well, while you guys are still pulling up the spreadsheet, once again, I sent it to you via email yesterday. So once again, it should look like this. And what we're going to be doing is kind of filling it in, talking about it as we sort of go through. So, this course, what is this course all about, and how is this different from what has been done previously? So, what we decided to do was to take some of the content that we had done in Excel in the real estate finance course and the real estate investments course and push it over into this course to make this course 100% all about Excel, all about using Excel. And so, in essence, those of you that, let's say, that have already had real estate finance, you've already had real estate investment, you're going to see some similarities with the spreadsheets that we've created in those courses used in this course. But we're also going to be adding some new stuff along the way and explaining some things along the way, maybe even more so than previously was the case. And so what we're doing is basically expanding the content of the finance course and the investments course and this course. So the finance and investments course are going to be exclusively calculator-based, whereas this course is going to be exclusively Excel-based. So this course will be probably a bit more relaxed in the sense that all you really got to do is just kind of follow along, ask questions, and hopefully understand what we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing. And so a good piece of this course is really just understanding the functionality of Excel and then applying it to a wide variety of sort of real estate questions, okay? So as an example, today, the spreadsheet that you see before you is, I created this yesterday, and in essence, it is a combination of a handful of different sort of basic kind of time value of money calculator, cash flow calculator, amortization calculator, cap rate calculator, and kind of effective interest rate calculator. And what this is doing is we're going to walk through this step by step and sort of show you what are the formulas that you need to basically populate this model. So I've already created the model, I've already set it up all the parameters, and all we're really going to do is we're going to populate every single one of the yellow cells, okay, which are basically formula cells. And we're going to talk about what the formula is, how you think about it, how you use it, so that you can then begin to sort of take information from here and then also create your own models, okay? But the idea is to kind of familiarize you with some of the different, as I said, some of the different functions and functionality of Excel. Now, at the end of today, or by the end of today, the goal is twofold. One, you will have a fully working spreadsheet, okay, with all of the appropriate formulas embedded within this model, okay? Number two, there's a 12-question quiz that you will take using the model to basically solve the questions on the quiz. Does that make sense? Okay? All it really is doing is it's verifying that you actually did what you had to do to accurately complete this, and that you just did not simply try to hard code numbers. In other words, it's my way of verifying that you actually did what we were supposed to be doing during class. Does that make sense? In other words, if you're just going to sit there and not do anything and not actually update the model as we're doing it, you're going to be screwed whenever it comes to the quiz time, okay? So the whole idea is for you to follow along, keep up with me. As you have questions, ask them. And this is going to be run, for the most part, a bit more of a kind of a lab sort of orientation. So we'll probably, I don't know, we'll see how long it takes us to get through this, see how long it takes us to get through whatever questions and issues that you've got, and then ultimately the quiz at the end, okay? Now, do I anticipate it probably taking still the full 4 hours to get through everything? Yeah, probably so. But you never know. We'll see. Okay, any questions on that? Now, if you take a look at the syllabus, and you specifically look at our sort of schedule, today we're scheduled to do overview of Microsoft Excel, time value of money and financial functions, creation of the time value of money calculator, NPV, IRR functions. And then what we're going to do, as I said, we'll take a quiz. Next week we'll do fixed rate mortgage, variable rate mortgage model. Following week, front door, back door. Next week, construction. Following week, before tax cash flow, then after tax cash flow, energy efficient building, creation of lender underwriting criteria model. So all of those were the different models that we're going to do sort of each week. So in essence, 8 weeks, 8 models, and which means that we'll also probably have 8 what I'm going to call proficiency quizzes at the end of each model. So for example, if you obviously complete the spreadsheet today, you do well on the quiz, theoretically you should be able to get 12.5% of your grade done at the end of today. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the key is to just, once again, keep up. And if you're not keeping up and you've got questions, that's okay. Legitimate questions are fine. But we've got to obviously do what we can to kind of move through this. RJ?
In an instance where you miss class for whatever reason, is there an opportunity to make up the quiz, or?
We'll have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
But as a general rule, no.
Okay.
Okay? All right.
Oh wow, that's what it is.
Okay.
Dr. Carty?
Yep.
That's how it shows
Are the quizzes usually at the end of class?
They will be at the end of class, because you can't answer them until you finish the spreadsheets. Okay. All right. Everybody have the model pulled up?
No, not yet.
Okay. You get the model pulled up. Start here in just a couple seconds.
Professor Forgy,
Yep.
well, guys, did you find a USB on the main computer there? On the actual lab thing? Did you see like a black USB?
I've got mine, but that's the only one.
All right, thank you. That's the
Can we use our computer?
I left my USB.
You can use, yeah, I'm here. You can use your computer.
in the computer. Remember for the GIS presentation? I was the last person, so I left my USB and I actually go find the presentation without my USB. So I
You
did
delete.
everything all over.
Refresh the screen.
I left it here, and then when the patient was Monday by 6
Yep.
p.m. right?
There's time value of money, right?
10 pages
Right.
or whatever.
There's time value of
I came
time.
back home and I was trying to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let's just sort of go through, I'm going to kind of walk you through the what I've set up and why I've set up what I have. All right, so this top model is simply a very basic time value of money calculator. You can do every bit of this, everything that's on the screen, you can do on a regular handheld calculator, okay, like the HP 10B. And so, but what this does, it allows you to obviously see all of your inputs all at once and instantly be able to, change one variable and boom, it's done. So it's a lot less time consuming than, once you get the model set up, than actually obviously using the financial calculator. And so specifically, what I have done is, the way to sort of think about this is in columns, okay? So this is one type of problem where you're going to be solving for the term, okay? You're solving for n, that's what's in yellow, okay? The next one, you're going to be solving for the interest rate. The next one, you're going to be solving for the present value. The next one, solving for the payment. And then the last one, solving for future value. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Okay? So, as an example, let's start off over here with the one that we are probably most accustomed to, which is solving for the payment. All right? And using the payment function in Excel. All right? So here's what you're going to do. And actually, before we do that, let's go ahead and take a look at this other line. Now, this is something that I added to basically take into account the number of compounding periods that are set up. Now, as I have talked about in other classes, that typically with real estate, you have two different types of compounding periods. Either you're going to have monthly compounding, which is 12 times per year, or you're going to have annual compounding, which is 1 time per year. And so in this particular case, that payment per year column all the way across, the way I've got it set up right now, is just simply set up for monthly compounding, okay? Now you can change those 12s to 1 or to whatever, and it will accurately, obviously, represent that, but we're going to get to that in just a moment. But right below that is what I'm going to refer to as the total number of payments. So, for example, if you've got a 30-year mortgage with 12 monthly payments, the total in would be what? 360. Does that make sense? Whereas if you have a 30-year loan with annual payments, the total in would only be 30. Okay? And so what we're going to do, the first calculation, or the first set of very simple calculations, is going to be basically taking the payments per year times, in this case, the number of periods. So it's going to be basically, in that first column, equal B5 times B8. Okay? Now, once you've done that, then just hit enter. Now, in this case, it's going to show up 0 because there's nothing here for n. But now, once you've got that, go down here to the bottom right-hand corner, and where it turns into a little small plus sign, you should be able to just simply drag over all the way and then release. If you've done it correctly, it should show up 360 for those remaining columns, because all it's doing is taking 12 times 30, which is 360. In the first column, since there's not anything in the end cell, it's going to be 0, because you're multiplying basically 12 times 0 equals 0.
I got lost on the first column.
B2, right? B5, B2. No,
B5 times what?
times B8.
B8.
B8, sorry, my bad.
B5 times B8. Okay? Got it?
And
Okay,
now,
moving forward.
Bring the mouse. No.
Okay, so let's go back
No, this way.
here
Click on it.
to cell
on the bottom.
E11.
Now drag it.
All right? Now, those of you that, just out of curiosity, and this is also probably instructive not only for me, but for everybody else in the class. On a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate your Excel financial proficiency?
1.
Okay, how many say they're between a 1 and a 3? Okay, how many of you would say you're between 4 and a 6? How many of you would say you're basically 7, 8, or a 9? And anybody claim that they're a 10? Okay. Good to know. So it's basically about a third, a third, a third, is what I'm saying from out there in the audience. Okay. So those of you with obviously more Excel proficiency than the others, feel welcome to help out your neighbor, okay? All right? Those of you that obviously, know exactly what you're doing, then this will be pretty straightforward. Okay. So let's go here to, once again, cell E11. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the payment for this particular set of loan information. So to do that, we start off with start off with equal PMT, which accesses the payment function. Now in Excel, what should pop up is a nice little explanation. Now, you may not be able to read this part on the screen, but it simply says calculates the payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate, okay? Now, but whenever you then, after you've typed in the equal PMT and then you open up the parentheses, then it shows you here are the variables that you need to populate in order to solve for the payment. So part of what I'm going to be showing you now is just simply how you've got to put these variables in, okay? Because it's a little bit different than you do on the calculator. And there are a couple of little weird assumptions that you kind of got to deal with Excel. Nothing overly complicated, but there are just a few key things that you need to make sure that you're aware of. Now, in this situation, unlike the calculator, it does matter what order you put the variables, the reference variables in, okay? So, but the nice thing is, Excel guides you and tells you what the next variable is, what the current variable is, and that sort of thing. So in this particular case, it's popped up that the first variable that we need to put in to solve the payment is the rate, or the interest rate. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go up to that cell, which is the 10%. I'm going to click on it. Okay? Now, what that does is that's simply highlighting cell E9 as the rate for the payment. Okay, is everybody with me on this? Now, you would think you could stop there with the payment, but you can't. And the reason is because if you do, Excel is going to automatically assume every rate that's put in is an annually compounded rate, okay? So what we've got to do is we've got to make an adjustment for the number of compounding periods so that Excel can basically flip between monthly compounding, annual compounding, quarterly compounding, whatever it is. So in order to do that, what you're going to do is after the E9, you're going to hit divided by, and then you're going to go up and you're going to capture cell, in this case, E5. Now what is E5? E5 is the number of compounding periods. So all it's doing is it's saying, okay, take that 10% rate, divide it by 12 to get the appropriate monthly compounding rate. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so once you've done that, we're done with the rate. So we can hit comma. That takes us to the next variable, which is NPER, or number of periods. Okay, now in this case, what we're referring to in essence is the total number of periods associated with this particular type of loan. Now, we can try to shortcut it if we want to and use the total N number, which in essence is what we're really doing, but my purist sort of mentality says let's go ahead and put the two variables in that are actually comprising this, which are going to be basically the N times the number of compounding periods. So in this case, you're going to do E8 times E5. Okay? Everybody with me? All you're doing is multiplying the 30 times the 12. Okay? Now, so that takes care of the number of periods. So you hit comma. Okay, so the next variable it asks for is the loan amount or the present value. So in this case, that's going to simply be the 100,000. So we click on that, cell E10. Okay? Everybody good?
Yeah.
Okay, once you've got that, that one's easy, don't have to modify it, comma. Then The future value is going to be basically, we're going to have to click over here probably on D12 and then use the arrow key because it's kind of hidden underneath everything. But it's actually cell E12. Okay?
E12?
E as in Edward,
We
12,
we get
for the future
D12.
value.
D12.
E12
Yeah, it's under
is the future value, comma, then it's asking you for the type, whether it is
Oh, yeah.
a beginning of the period or end of the period, okay? In other words, an annuity due versus an ordinary annuity, okay? Now, for our purposes, what I've done is I've set up a separate line down here, this type 0 equals end of the period, 1 equals begin, so just click on basically cell E14. Okay? Now once you've done that,
E14?
E14, and you should be able to close the parentheses, just double check, make sure that everything is identical. Okay? Now we should be able to hit enter. And there we go, we've got our answer, 877.57, negative. Okay, so our payment function has been populated for the model. Is everybody good with that, yes or no?
No.
Okay. Once again, those of you that are sitting around somebody, help each other out. I'll pop up the formula once again. So it just simply reads equal PMT, open parentheses, E9 divided by E5, comma, E8 times E5, comma, E10, comma, E12, comma, E14, close parentheses. Okay? How many people do not have it? Correct. Anybody? Okay, good. All right, so let's do this. Let's go to the present value column.
I had the same without that.
Okay, calculate present value. I want to see if you can do it on your own, but we're going to start off just equal PV, open parentheses. Now see if you can do, pretty much, it's almost the exact same thing we just did, but see if you can do it on your own.
Sorry, Dr. Forgy, can you repeat what I were doing again?
Okay, once again, what I've asked you to do, simply go to the present value column,
Okay.
and in the present value cell, start off with the equal PV, and then see if you can populate that cell and get the correct answer. The correct answer, if you did it correctly, $100,000. But what I just showed you to do on the previous one should be enough information for you to be able to do this on your own.
What is the type?
Type is the, down at the bottom.
Oh yeah.
The
D14.
raised divided.
Okay, once you've got it correct, raise your hand, just let me know.
How, what is the value?
$100,000.
No,
Yes.
I got it 99.
99,000.
Really close enough. Just because we're rounding.
8,775.
Got it.
8,775.
No, it should, well, hold on, let me just do it real quick. Okay, so once again, for those of you that are having a little bit of difficulty, all right, we start off with the rate, 10%. What we have to do to it, divide it by
Basically, yes.
the 12,
12.
comma,
Yeah.
take the number of periods,
30 times 12.
times 12,
D5.
comma,
Next to it.
payment, D11,
Comma.
comma, future value, D12, comma, and then type D14,
0.
so 99,999.82. Okay? Now you're saying, well, okay, why is it not precisely $100,000? Because of rounding. What we've done is whenever I input the actual payment amount, I put in 877.57. And while that is the actual payment, it actually has a lot of extra decimals out there that cause it to not obviously be precise. Does that make sense?
I'm trying.
Okay. All right. So we got 2 of them done. All right. All right. So let's try to do the interest rate.
This is a function.
Okay. Equal rate. Open parentheses.
NPR.
Okay. Once again, see if you can put it in. Because it's not going to do you any good just to type in exactly what I give you. You've got to try to pick up on what I showed you before.
What do we put for gas?
What is gas?
Okay, that's a good question. One of the things that Excel does is whenever it calculates rates of return, especially internal rate of return and sort of interest rates, it goes through what's referred to as an iterative process. And it plays within itself kind of like this high-low game. And it basically, to get to the actual answer, it sort of says, oh, is it 10%? No, that's too high. Is it 9%? No, that's too low. Oh, is it 9.25? No, that's too low. You know, and it plays this game in its own sort of world, and ultimately narrows it down to what it actually is. But for whatever reason, and this is a legacy issue with Excel, that
Sounds like
basically
August.
you've got to offer it a seed number to start with. It almost doesn't matter what that seed number is. I typically use like 0.10 as like 10% and use that as the guess, but it's not going to inherently impact your answer.
So
Okay,
we just
so in
put
doing it,
what?
number of periods, to start off with this, 30, or C8 times C5, comma,
C11.
payment is simply cell C11, comma, present value is cell C10, comma, future value is cell C12, comma, type is cell C14, comma, and then the guess, I'm just going to put in 0.1, close the parentheses, and hit enter. And we get 0.83. Now, why is it 0.83? Any scholars here that want to try to answer why it's 0.83? Because it technically is the right answer, but it's not the right answer.
Because it's in monthly.
Yes! Thank you. Okay, so what do you have to do to make it annual? Multiply it times 12. All right, so go back up to what you have just put in, and at the end of all of that, type in times 12. Or actually, instead of doing times 12, no, don't do that. Do times C5. And the reason for that is that way it will adjust depending on the number of compounding periods.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay? Boom, there we are, 10%. Okay? Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Now we've got 3 out of the 5 done. All right, let's go over here to N. Okay, if we're solving for N, we're solving for the number of periods. NPER. Okay? Again, see if you can fill out the rest. You know that the answer is going to be 30.
Anybody else get a number?
I got it.
You did?
I've got a problem here.
Right.
Now, whenever you initially put everything in, you get 360. Why do you get 360? Because it's monthly. So what you gotta do is that once you've got everything, just like we did on the previous one, in that case, we had to multiply it by 12, but here, we've got to divide it by 12. And then you should get 30.
We do it.
Do I divide by 12 or divide by B5?
You divide it by 12, or divide it by, I'm sorry, or divide it by B5. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay? Okay? All good? Okay. Now, once again, because of rounding, and I purposely left it this way, but you sort of see that the actual total in is slightly more than 360 months with a bunch of decimals out there, and the reason is because in order to fully pay off the loan with 877.57, it's going to take just slightly more than that final month. Okay, there'll be a little bit of change left over. All right? Okay, final one. Okay, this one we're calculating the future value. Okay, see if you can put it in. And while it should be 0, it's going to be about $2 or $3 because of, once again, rounding.
$3.55. Going good so far.
Okay. This one we divided. This one we
355.
to get 360.
$3.55. Okay. All right. So we've completed this first little piece of this. All right. So now what we can do? Okay, is everybody's matching up? Okay. I'm going to get to that point. Help your brethren next to you. And then let's try to see if we can play around with this a little bit.
Divided by
Could you put it back on so we can see the
Divided by
formula?
12?
12. No, the first column. You go. And now comma.
Okay, then it says 17 now.
And you do 30 times 12 times, no, 30. It's a comma again, comma. 30
Yeah, multiple.
multiply here times 12.
Comma.
Comma.
And it says this one. That's on this.
And then
Okay.
comma, comma.
Everybody got it? So we move forward? Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to do a little,
brown period.
for lack of better description, just sort of stress testing and make sure everything's working like it's supposed to. All right, so let's start over at the far left. And let's just say that we want to change things from being monthly to annual. Let's see what happens. Oh, we already got a problem. So let's see what if we've done anything.
Yeah, because once you get that answer, the other answer comes out wrong too.
Because you're dividing by the B5.
No, I took that out. That shouldn't affect it.
Then you divide by it again. Oh.
Let's just see. Test it. Get rid of both of those references and see if that doesn't do it. So what
Yeah,
did
you
we-
have P9.
What did we screw up? We got the rate, we got the payment, we got the present value.
The rate isn't
Nine divided by.
B9 divided by B5?
By B5.
No, I had that and then I took it out. Is it working on yours?
And
Yeah,
at the end,
mine's
it's,
working.
Times B5. After the parentheses.
Comma
times B5.
B11, B10, B12, B14.
Divided by B5, sorry.
Yeah, for whatever, is it, so it's actually working on your computer?
Yeah, and mine too.
It's not on mine.
Mine's not working.
Oh, Excel, you're such a wonderful beast. Okay, well, the formula is correct. It should be working. I don't know why, actually, it's not working. That's an interesting thing that it's not. Yeah, so it works for anything other than interesting.
Oh, mine came the same thing as yours, man.
So if you put 4, it doesn't work. If you put anything else, it works.
You see this? And then
Yeah,
you put
so
correction
anything
things,
under-
go
Under 12?
Under 12 doesn't work. That makes no sense. Okay, well, let's just leave it at 12. Skip on down to the interest. All right, so the interest rate, let's say we make it 5%, and we make the loan amount or the present value 500,000. And then for the payment, we're gonna make it
Now it's not working, the function.
let's try 4,000.
Negative.
Negative 4,000. Let's see if that works. Okay.
Yeah, now it's not working.
Yeah.
Okay, but hold on. Make sure that we put in, once again, 12 payments per year, 5%, 500,000 as the loan amount, but negative 4,000 for the payment. Not positive 4,000, but negative 4,000.
Now it's working.
Okay. And let's say we put in, I don't know, negative 10,000 for future value. Yep. So that changes things a little bit. 174 months. So assuming we have a balance at the end that we still have to pay off. Okay. All right, but everybody is matching on all those, yes?
Yep.
Okay, that's the main thing. All right. So I'm going to put it back to what it was, the 10%, 100,000, negative 877, 57, and then 0. Okay? Okay, so let's just see what happens if we go over here, we fool around with this one. All right, so make that one payment per year. And we change the payment amount to negative, let's say 10,000. Okay, so just check those numbers and see if those are working. So once again, one payment per year, 100,000 still is the loan amount, but 10,000 as our singular payment.
Something is wrong in mine.
Okay, once again, make sure it's negative 10,000.
Yep.
And then 100.
Mine shows 111.69%.
Okay, once again, just double check, one payment per year. Yes? Carlos?
No, in the second column.
One
Yeah,
payment per year.
Yeah.
30 for the end, 100,000 for the present value, and 10,000 for the payment, negative. Okay, double check this.
The formula?
Make sure the formula is the same.
10,000 here. Oh,
At the end, did you multiply by a C5?
Oh, no.
Okay, that's fine. Okay? This is why we're going through this, just make sure that you're
There you go.
correct.
9.30.
Okay.
That was it.
Okay, so just put everything back the way it was on that one. 12 and negative 877.57. Okay? Okay, let's move over to this one. Oops. All right, let's see if we can make it. Okay, one payment per year. Let's say 20 years at 5%. And negative 500
What is wrong
and
with
negative 7,000. Okay. I was going to use some random numbers there for that one, but let's just see if once again you match up. Yep.
this? Now that I changed back to 12, it's in 120%. But now it doesn't have. I mean,
Did you make sure you divide the payment by 12? Or
yeah.
not the payment, but the interest rate.
CA times 5.
Okay.
In the end, it's divided by 12.
In the end, it's divided by 12 or multiplied?
No. No, the total n is multiplied by 12. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, the formula at the end.
Okay, hold on. Let's go back. Are we talking about the second column or the third column?
Can you go back?
The second column, yeah.
Okay, so this one.
Yep.
No, you don't change that.
He has 1 and 20, 20, that's what I'm doing.
No,
Wrong?
no, no.
No?
You just have to change this one.
I don't know what
This
it's wrong. I
one-
don't know what it's exactly right.
This one is just equal D5 times D8.
So the 5% is not there, huh?
Question.
You don't have
I have
5%
the
there?
same formula in the second column that you have.
This you have to change. This one you don't.
Mine shows 120%. It had the same formula.
The first one is 1, the second
Okay.
is 20.
Yeah,
This
but
one is 20.
It's a formula for you. The
Oh,
first
now I
one-
see.
No,
What?
you put
The 877.
What is it?
That's what I
equal
need.
D5.
Okay. All right, so go on to the third column now. Once again, column D. All right, change the payments per year to 1, the N to 20,
Right?
interest rate to 5, payment to negative 500, and future value to negative 7,000.
Negative 7,000.
Okay, just to see if the calculation ends up being correct for the present value of 8869.33.
I got 6231.
6231.
32,
It should be, I can't imagine what the reason would be why it would be off.
Yeah, I was invited.
So the things that we're changing are payments per year.
Okay, we're only changing the non-yellow cells.
Right.
Okay, so we've changed the payment per year from 12 to 1. We changed the N from 30 to 20.
Right.
We changed the interest rate from 10% to 5%. We changed the payment from negative 877.57 to negative 500. And we changed the future value from 0 to negative 7,000. That's all we changed.
Got it.
Okay, once again, I'm going to pop the formula up here for this one just to make sure that you copied it correctly.
Yeah.
multiply.
No, you divide
Okay.
this by this.
All right, so let's put it back the way it was.
Okay.
Divide
12,
the 1 year
30,
divided by the
10%,
That's how you get the rate.
negative 877.57,
PR is
and 0.
times
Okay.
this one, period. It's n times period. That's why
Right.
it's NPR.
Go to the fourth column, or column E. Okay,
Did he change it again?
okay, once again, change it from 12 to 1. Change the term from 30 to 15. Change the interest rate from 10 to 7%. change the loan amount or the present value from 100,000 to 300,000, and then change the future value to negative 50,000. Let's see if everything's matching. Okay. All right, good. Okay, let's put it back the way it was. 12, 30, 10, 100, and 0. Okay, and then the final column. Okay, change it also to 1, payment per year, 10 years, 7%, 50,000, and negative 300. Okay. Once again, the whole purpose of doing this is just to ensure if you did do something kind of quirky or whatever, that hopefully it's not going to throw everything off. All right. So everybody matching up to that. Put it back the way it was, then we move on. Okay, so let's do this. So once again, the whole idea behind this first little thing is this gives us a nice little sort of alternative to using the financial calculator to do these kind of basic kind of calculations. All right, so that if I were to give you, and I'm just going to give you one of the quiz questions. Okay. Okay, so one of the quiz questions, and so you just listen and input. Okay, assume, and you're going to be solving, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you're going to be solving for the payment. Okay, so that's going to indicate you're going to need to go over to column E. Okay, assume that you have a 15-year mortgage with a 2.75% interest rate, compounded annually. Your loan amount is $7,500,000.
7 million?
$7,500,000. Assume that the loan is paid in full by the end of term, therefore the loan balance or future value will be 0.
All right.
What is the annual payment to be made at the end of each period?
Oh, is that interest rate?
2.75. Okay? So let's just sort of take a look. We said it was annual compounding. We said it was for 15 years. We said 2.75% was the interest rate. And the loan term was $7,500,000. And we said that the future value was going to be 0. And the payment is made at the end of the period, so that is obviously type 0. So the answer to that, the payment would be $616,000. So that is an actual question off the quiz. Okay, do you follow me?
Okay.
Okay.
Can you read the question again, please? Just one time so I can just hack it in there. Thank you.
Okay. Assume that you have a 15-year mortgage
Okay.
with a 2.75% interest rate, compounded annually. Your loan amount is $7,500,000.
Okay.
Assume that the loan is paid in full by the end of term, therefore the loan balance, or the future value, will be 0. what is the annual payment to be made at the end of each period? Yep.
When it says the end of term, that will fill out the total end.
In other words, yeah, in other words,
The
there's
15?
no balance at the end of the loan. There's no outstanding balance. It's a zero balance or zero future
Yeah,
balance.
I kind of figure like which variables are like on the, but the only one that I didn't get was the total end.
Well,
What
you know,
statement on the question?
The
fill
total
out?
end is going to be calculated for you. All you need to know is that it's annual compounding and it's 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
Okay? Make sense? Okay, let's move forward. Put everything back the way it was. So if anyone dares miss that question on the quiz, you may just have to ask you to leave. Okay. All right, so let's move over to the cash flow calculator. All right, and I'm going to kind of try to see if I can zoom to the whole thing here. It's not going to be pretty in the sense of the font is going to be really small, but you should be able to, I want to show you the whole thing first, and then I'll blow it up so you can actually see the numbers here in a minute. Okay, so let's explain what the cash flow calculator is. Okay, so one of the things that you can obviously do on the financial calculator is use the cash flow function, okay, which is entering basically similar, different, unusual sort of cash flows from one period to the next, and then typically you're solving for either net present value or internal rate of return, okay? What this allows us to do specifically is we can choose whether or not it's going to be annual compounding, something other than annual, or monthly. Now, I did something, really basic little thing, but this is something I didn't include in the quiz, but I thought it would be kind of fun to do. If you actually go up here and you change the 1 to 12, it makes it monthly. Same thing over here. Now you're saying, how did I do that? With a simple little if-then statement, okay? So this is another thing that you should become familiar with as a little tool, okay?
Wow.
Now, it looks a lot more complicated than what it really is, okay? It's not that complicated, all right? The way if-then statements work, it's, once again, it's all about logic, okay? If this is this, then do this. If it's not that, do something else. That's the way the logic works in if-then statements. So let's read what the if-then statement has. If B18 equals 1,
Is the one
then what we want you to do is pop up the word annual. If it is not that, then instead, if it's 12, then pop up monthly. And if it's not that, then you simply pop up other. That's all it is. It's that simple. Okay, now the beauty of if-then statements is that you can take numerical information
and make it
like
work.
a credit score, or like for example, one of the things you're going to be doing toward the end of the semester is basically doing kind of a loan sort of qualifier of sorts, and where you're going to put in a variety of different maybe credit information about a tenant or about an investor, owner, borrower, and then using that criteria, then you're going to basically, the final solution will be approve or deny the loan kind of thing.
Like GPA, excellent, good.
Right, and so, and you can convert virtually anything from numerical information into textual information, or vice versa, okay? So, like for example, whenever all professors, when we do grades and we got to do these stupid A+, A-, or whatever it is, all these different things, well, we can say if the grade falls between 90 to 90, whatever it is, 93, it's an A-. If it's a 94 and higher, it's an A. and automatically will do that kind of calculation. So the if-then statement can be used for a lot of different things. And Excel has all sorts of help functions embedded within it that show you how to use it, okay? And my advice to you would be to just start with some really simple ones, copy like this one, and just sort of play around with it a little bit, okay? I mean, it's the sort of thing that, it's only going to be through your own exploration that you're going to kind of nail it down and finally get the hang of it, okay? But don't get scared by it. Now, what you'll find in some people's spreadsheets, they will have these if-then statements that are literally a mile long with all kinds of, weird little things that it does. And it looks, as I said, it looks a lot worse than what it is. Because if you just really follow, it's just a logic train. And just understanding the logic from one step to the next. If it satisfies this criteria, then do this. If it satisfies this criteria, then do this, and so forth, so on. Okay? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so that was kind of a sidelight. Okay. So, up here, let's say that we want to do this on an annual basis, this first column on an annual basis, and maybe the second column on a monthly basis. Now, what you do when you're putting in the information is we always start with time period 0, because the assumption is we're going to make an expenditure, and this model, this is the way we've set it up, is we make an expenditure at time period 0, followed by the actual income streams for the property over however many months or however many years. Now, in this particular case, I limited it, not for any good reason other than I just didn't feel like that, that it was really all that beneficial to go beyond 15. But this lets us either do 15 years or 15 months. Okay? Now, you can obviously make it as long as you want. It could be literally hundreds of months or hundreds of years, quite frankly. But most of the calculations we're going to be doing, chances are it's going to be just a few months or whatever. Okay. So in the first instance of the annual, you got a $10,000 expenditure at time period 0, followed by $3,000 payments for 5 years. Okay. And so the calculations that we're going to do down here, we're going to calculate internal rate of return, and we're going to calculate the net present value using the discount rate that we've supplied here. So we can change, obviously, this to any percent we want, but the parts that we need to fill in terms of the formulas are going to be within these yellow cells. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So let's start here with IRR. Okay. So equal, oops, IRR,
Still need.
open parentheses, this is pretty simple, values, comma, guess. So another one of those guess things, okay? Well, the values piece is really simple. All we do is we go up here, we take the first cell, and we drag down, and I want you to drag down all the way to basically B36. So B21 colon B36. So that way you're capturing everything. Because if you only capture the piece that we've got there currently, then if you all of a sudden you have one that's longer than that, it's not going to work. Okay? Okay? So after that, comma, and then for the guess, kind of like I did before, 0.1. Now, what that, well, let's go ahead and do it real quick. Okay, we get the correct answer, 15.24, all right? But, let's leave it there for a second. Now let's go up and let's change this to monthly. Oh, it didn't change. Well, why? Because we didn't adjust it, okay? So we need to adjust this for it being monthly. So we're going to need to multiply it by cell B18. There we go.
Professor Forgy, can you explain that guess again, that 0.1?
Yeah, it's kind of meaningless. As I said, it's really more of an Excel legacy thing that at some point, whenever the original programmers were coming up with Excel, the only way they could calculate a rate of return, because it's not just an absolutely simple formula that you apply, it's a bit more of an iterative process that you've got to, as I said, the computer has to play almost like a high-low game and ultimately isolate what the actual number is. And so it's just simply what's called a seed value of just a starting point for Excel to begin to play the high-low game.
Okay, so that 0.1 is not 10%.
It is, but it's not. I mean, it is in the sense that's the value that we're giving it, but it's really meaningless.
Okay.
And you're gonna use it every.
I do. I mean, for most part, it's always going to work for our purposes. Okay. So once again, let me blow this up a little bit. Okay. So once again, here's the formula. Okay. All right. Now, what you should be able to do is simply copy, just drag that over. It'll save you from having to type it in again. Okay, and
So
it should make the adjustments to, obviously, to the column C.
Oh.
Okay? All right?
Yes.
Now,
Click here and.
all right. The NPV, which is simply taking each individual cash flow, discounting them by the discount rate, and then taking and subtracting out the initial cash outflow. This is one of the quirky things in Excel. Okay, so it's a little bit more complicated than the internal rate of return function. I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so you're going to do equal NPV, open parentheses, and then you're first of all going to take the rate, and then you're going to divide that by the number of,
12.
in this case, cell B18. You don't want to just type in a hard-coded 12, because what if you change it to 1?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's the reason why we've got that there. Okay, comma. Okay, now, it asks for the values. This is where it's totally different than the internal rate of return. And this is where people invariably get screwed up. So please make sure you're paying attention. All right, with the NPV, the first cell that you capture is not time period 0. The first cell that you capture is time period 1. Okay? So we go down. B22. We can actually scroll down.
A B36, right? Or no?
Okay. To B36. Okay? Now, we're going to close the parentheses. We're not quite done, but we're going to go ahead and just close parentheses just to see what number it gives us. Okay? It gives us 14,814.31. Yep.
Why has a green triangle in the corner?
Because it's an inconsistent sort of reference. So just kind of ignore that for the time being. Okay? Now,
I don't know, man.
what we're going to do is, and I'll explain this and I'll actually work through an example of this, but what I want you to do is at the end of that, do plus cell B21, which is the outflow. Okay? So that gives us our actual answer. Now,
Plus 21?
Okay, hold on. Okay, I'm gonna go back to annual on that. All right, here's what I want you to do. Okay, everybody, this is the annual number. I went up and changed it from monthly to annual, and so your return should be 15.24, and the discount rate should be 29.88. And I think that is hopefully consistent. Yeah, that's consistent with what I gave you on the handout, okay? Just as a check figure. All right, here's what I want you to do. This is just for your own benefit. Most all of you, if not all of you, have your financial calculators, okay? What I want you to do is just simply to prove to yourself that it's the same thing. All you're going to be doing is you're going to, in the calculator, you're going to have one payment per year, and then for the calculator, you're going to put in the initial cash outflow, which was what? $10,000, yes? So you're going to put in 10,000 plus minus as a cash flow. Then you're going to put in 3,000 as a cash flow. And we can actually do a shortcut here, and because the 3,000 occurs how many times? 5. So we can use 5 shift. Now this is critical. It is not in, it is in sub J, which is on the calculator below the cash flow key. So you're actually, that's why you're hitting 5 shift in sub J, which is accessed below the cash flow key. So everybody see that on our calculator. Now all that's doing is just simply saying, put in that $3,000 5 times. Okay? Then, shift internal rate of return for the year, and you should match with the 15.24.
Yep.
Okay?
Where is the IRR?
All right? I'm just showing you how to basically do the same exact thing on the calculator. All right? Then, for the net present value,
Yeah, 4.24.
you're going to put in 5% as your interest rate, and then you're going to simply solve for net present value. Not present value, but net present value, which is, once again, that is underneath the PRC key. All right? And you should hopefully match up with 29.8843. Yes? Okay, good. All right. So the whole purpose of that was just simply to show you that's how you could do it on the calculator versus doing it in Excel. Okay? Yep.
Can you just show the calculation for the net present value really quick?
Yeah.
Okay? All right? So once you've got that one correct, once again, you should be able to do the same thing we did above. Simply go over, hit the bottom right corner of that, drag it over. All right, so let's just go up and double check that one, make sure we're on the same page. We've got it set up as 12 payments per year, so it's monthly. So each of those cash flows are considered to be monthly. Now, I didn't change anything in terms of the numbers, so it should be the same numbers on your sheet. So 140.67 is our internal rate of return. 52.36.56 should be our NPV. Are I matching up? Okay, good. All right, so instead of speeding past this real quick, let's just kind of talk about a few other little things. Okay. So, let's just sort of look, we know that the left one, in essence, was going to kind of zero these out. All right. So let's just sort of pick some numbers here for a second. We can also change the, obviously, initial cash outflow. So how much do we want our property to be worth? In other words, how much will you spend on it? Give me a dollar amount.
$1 million.
$1 million. Okay, so negative $1 million. All right? So our cash flow is off of that. Now, so just think about this for a second. These are annual cash flows. So basically, 10% of $1 million would be $100,000 a year. Okay? So in order, if we wanted to throw off something greater than a 10% rate of return, we've got to have something at least around $100,000 a year. So what number do we want to potentially put in there?
150.
150,000. So that gives us a 15% rate of return if we went all the way down. But let's just go 150 for that first year. Okay? But now the key thing to sort of take note of is it's going to be a loss until we obviously fully recoup the amount that we initially invested. Okay? So let's see how long we've got to put in 150,000 for before we get a positive return. Oops. Okay, so we've gone 5 years and we still have a negative return. So it looks like
9 years.
oops, after 7 years, we get a slightly positive return of a 1.23%. Okay, but our discount rate, which is our sort of hurdle rate, if we will, we're not meeting that. So, I mean, while we are getting a positive return, we're not meeting our threshold return of the 5%. So, in order to meet our threshold return, we're probably going to have to go at least maybe another year or two. So let's just see. So yeah, so 9 years, we get a 6.46% overall return and a 5% basically discount rate, and that gives us a $66,000 profit above and beyond our hurdle rate of the 5%. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is just one way you can potentially use this. So it's just, you know, a way of kind of like determining like a payback period of sorts. Okay. You know, how many years would it take me at this level of income to potentially pay back my initial investment and generate the potential rate of return that I want to generate? Okay, does that make sense? Because a lot of investment funds specify and say, look, we demand a 15% rate of return on our equity, okay? And if that's the case and you know what the cash flows are going to be, is it possible to achieve that? You know, and how long will it take for that to occur? Okay?
So,
all right. Yep.
Like looking at an equation like this, like how would you kind of word that, though, in your own sense, right? Like, so let's say you're putting this together, and
I mean, I would word it simple as this. I would say, look, assume that you spent $1 million on a building and it generated $150,000 for the next 9 years. Calculate the internal rate of return and calculate the net present value using a 5% discount rate. Pretty straightforward. Okay. All right. So let's do the one on the right-hand side, which is monthly. Okay. What dollar amount we want to spend there?
1.5.
Okay.
Is this still monthly?
This one is monthly, but we can make it annual. Either way. All right. So currently it's monthly, I believe. Yep. Still monthly. All right. So if it's monthly, and we want to basically do this no longer than a year, just sort of think about it like this. So $1.5 million divided by 12 months, $125,000 a month would pay us back over 12 months, but wouldn't give us any sort of rate of return. Okay? But let's just say, okay, well, let's do 100,000. What the heck? So it generates 100,000. We get all the way down to month 12, and I want to show you something. Okay, there we go all the way down to month 12, and if you think about it, that would be what, 1.2 million that we recaptured, yes? Okay, $100,000 a month for 12 months would be 1.2 million. We spent 1.5 million, so clearly it doesn't make any sense. Now the question would be, this would be kind of a fun thing for you to figure out, is assume in that final month we can sell it. How much would we have to sell it for in order to break even with our discount rate of 5%? In other words, what dollar amount would we have to insert in month 12 to get our NPV to be 0?
300,000.
Okay, let's just see. Not quite. So let's say 400,000. Not quite.
447.
450,000.
Yeah, you'd be up 3.
Okay, so we're getting really close.
Said 437.
Okay, so somewhere between 448,000 and 449,000 appears to be where the crossover point occurs. Okay, now all that, the whole purpose of that is just simply, for us to be able to sort of say, okay, we've got a property, it's generated this amount of revenue over the past year, we know we want to sell it at the end of the year, how much do we have to sell it for in order to meet our base threshold of the 5% rate of return? Does that make sense? Okay, it's just another way of flipping the question, okay? All right. Everybody feel pretty comfortable with that? Yes, no, possibly could be? Okay, good.
Question?
Yep.
The $100,000 amounts, is that still the annual amount that you're paying, or is that?
No, this is not.
So that's just every month you're paying $100,000?
That is correct. That is correct. And at the end of the 12th month, you're basically the 100,000 plus an additional, if you will, 349,000. All right? Okay, moving forward.
And most of the times you're getting a discount rate based off the market, right?
Correct. And we can talk more about that here in just a second. All right, the next one we'll talk about is the cap rate calculator. Probably the easiest one on here, but also extremely valuable. This one couldn't be more simple. It's pretty much just multiplication and division, okay? No heavy-duty formulas, all right? So this is in essence nothing more than our good old friend REE, all right? So we've got our income divided by our cap rate gives us value, okay? Now, so what we're basically saying is, all right, if we're given any of the two variables, solve for the third, all right? So in the case of a value of $100,000 and a cap rate or rate of return of 10%, what would be our income? Well, there we simply say value times rate, or 100,000 times 10%, and you're going to get $10,000 as your income. Does that make sense? Okay? So, in order to do that, what are you going to do? Equal that times that. Boom, done. Can you handle that? Okay.
Yes.
Now see if you can do it for the other two, for the rate and for the value. You know what the answer is going to be, or you should know. Pretty close. Okay, so for the rate, what are we going to do?
15,000 divided by 100,000?
There you go. Okay, so cell C45 divided by cell C47.
Multiply by 100.
Boom, done. Okay. All right. The last one, the value. What are we going to do there?
10,000 divided by 20%?
That is correct. 10,000 divided by 20%. Boom, done. Okay. Now the purpose of doing that simple one was, as I've said before, ERV is probably the most fundamental formula and set of relationships for commercial property. And so at the most basic, you need to understand that very simple interrelationship. That, for example, we have a property, it's generating, $15,000 a year, and the current value is $100,000, then yeah, that means the cap rate is 15%. But what happens if all of a sudden the income declines to, let's say, $9,000? Well, now the cap rate is 9%. Okay, you can begin to see, as one goes up, does the other one go down? Does it, what happens? Okay, or if the value is, let's say, 500,000, with that amount of income, you've got a paltry cap rate of 1.8. Now, what we have seen, obviously in the market over the past, 10, 15 years is what? A decline, for the most part, in cap rates. Okay? Well, what does that mean? I mean, if you really sort of think about it, that means assuming the income of the property is kept constant, okay, just follow me on this, assuming income is kept constant and the cap rate is falling, what is that doing to values? Making them go up, go down, or stay the same?
No, it's increasing the value of properties.
See, this shows you don't understand. Okay? If cap rates are going down and income is staying constant, that means values are going up. Okay? Many of you said their values were going down. No. We look at it. Let's do what I've just said. We have, let's say, the income staying constant at $10,000, all right? And actually, let's just use this. Let me see. Yeah, we'll go do this. Okay. So, in the case of this one, we go from 500,000 to 100,000. Cap rate is going up. Okay. So in that case, once again, value declining, cap rate goes up. Okay. Cap rate go down. In this case, we go from a 10% cap rate to a 5% cap rate with the value staying the same. Our income is going down. Okay. We go over here, which is what I was discussing earlier. We have a cap rate that was, let's say, 20%. It goes down to 10%. The value of the property jumps up to $100,000. Let's say the cap rate goes down from 10% to 5%. The value of that property now is $200,000. Okay, so you basically, I mean, here's the thing and I'm sure Dustin can probably give us even more accurate numbers on this, but let's just say 10 years ago, the average cap rate was what? ballpark,
10
on,
years,
on
7,
a
8%.
commercial, like office building, shopping center sort of thing.
7-8%.
Okay, and now it's roughly,
5.
okay, so let's just say 7% to 5%. Let's just say, what sort of change would that have, all right? So we go over here, we put in 7%. Okay, so it was 7% on a property that's generating $10,000 a year in income. That's what it was, okay? Now, several years later, that same property, new cap rate of 5%, all of a sudden we're saying the property is worth more. But the income hasn't changed. The property is still generating the same amount of income. So what's happening there? Why is that happening? Well, one reason is we've got cheaper sources of capital. Because what has the Federal Reserve been doing for the past however many years? Keeping interest rates ridiculously, artificially low. Okay? What are they beginning to do with interest rates? Beginning to raise them. Okay? Therefore, what's probably going to happen to real estate prices? You're probably going to have higher cap rates, which means lower values. Okay? It only follows. It's very basic economics. All right? So my point is, that's why this is so important, is that, you know, understanding that simple relationship is fundamental to understanding basically what's going on in the market. That if you understand what cap rates are doing, you understand whether or not the fundamental income the property is generating is going up or down, or the values per square foot are going up and down, then you can kind of get a good sense of what's really taking place within the market. Make sense?
So is that the number one like source to changing cap rate? Or the
What?
Feds, like the sources of
I would say it's one of the factors, because there are obviously other sources of capital other than traditional lenders. But the point being is you've got a lot of different sources of capital chasing after all sorts of deals. And as a result, that low cost of lending is driving down the cap rates, and has driven down the cap rates to almost historic lows. I mean, you know, for many years, you know, I started teaching in 1988, okay, so almost 30 years ago. And whenever I first started teaching, it was pretty clear cap rates you almost automatically assumed were 10% for most property types, okay? And before that, you know, cap rates were in many cases estimated to be 12 or 15%, you know, back in the early 80s, late 70s. So, you know, there has been a fairly consistent decline of cap rates over time, but part of it is attributed to we probably better understand what's going on in the market, we have maybe less volatility in the market, we, you know, a lot more relevant, useful market information. But the point being is we still have to understand that those cap rates are what drive value, you know, and the reason, you know, once again, you know, they're called capitalization rates because it is the rate at which a project will attract capital. And so, you know, depending on the product type, depending on the risk, depending on the market that it's in, all of that's going to influence and drive what that actual cap rate is, in addition to the cost of funds associated with that particular property type. Okay, questions, thoughts, observations? Okay. All right. Okay. So look over here. Yep. Yep. All right, maybe zoom out a little bit. Okay. So this next one that I came up with, let me try to enhance it a little bit here.
Where is that?
Okay, is a loan amortization calculator. Okay? Now, those of you that already have me for finance, this is pretty straightforward. Those of you that are just now in my finance class, this is new. And we haven't talked about loan amortization yet, but we're going to talk about it a little bit here. So, one of the things that you put together, typically, you know, not only as a borrower, but as a lender, you're going to put together a loan amortization schedule, which is simply Okay, here's how much you borrowed. Here is your first month's principal payment, your first month's interest payment, the total payment, and then ultimately kind of the ending balance for that first month. And you're going to do that literally for every single month of the loan. Okay, so you can see how much of the loan you've paid off each month and how much you still owe. Does that make sense conceptually? Yes or no? Okay, we'll work through an example of that here in a second. But also, what you may want to know for any particular given time during the loan is how much interest that you've paid over a particular given time range, how much principal that you've paid over a certain time range, and how much you in total, those two combined, have paid, and then what the balance is at that point in time. Now, the particular example that I gave you on the handout specifically is starting with month number 1, finishing in month 180, or 15 years. Okay, 15 times 12 is 180. Now, the information that is used here, if you take a look right underneath loan amortization calculator, what does it say?
Using PMT column.
Using PMT column numbers. That means this column right here. Okay? So whatever we put in there is going to affect everything down here. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay? So, let me just kind of just take this for just a case in point here. So, for the example that's here in that column, we've got a $100,000 loan at 10% for 30 years. Monthly payments are $877.57. Everybody cool with that? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So you look down here at our loan amortization calculator, and this is going to frighten some of you, but halfway through that loan, which is 15 years into it, we have already paid $139,627.45 of interest. We have only paid back, after 15 years, we have only paid back $18,000 of that $100,000 loan, meaning we still owe, as you can see there, $81,664. Okay? Is that not disturbing?
It is.
And it's because of, once again, how interest is calculated. Okay? And so the total, we've already paid for that loan $157,000 total of actual out-of-pocket dollars. Okay? So, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to figure out those numbers for any particular period of time. So let's go over here, and we're going to use a function called cumulative interest. C-U-M-I-P-M-T. Okay? C-U-M-I-P-M-T. All right? And C-U-M-I-P-M-T. All right? Now, the first thing, just like all the other sort of functions, it asks for, okay, what is the rate? Okay?
On the PMT column?
So we're going to go up. Same thing we've done before. In this case, oops, wrong column.
Yeah, it's PMT.
Okay, take column or cell E9, divide it by E5, comma, and then the number of periods is going to be the 30, or E8, times E5 to 12, comma, then the present value of the loan, which is $100,000, comma, start period, which is going to be the cell right up here with the 1 in it, the cell F18, or F9, yeah, F19, I'm sorry, comma,
F20.
F20 is going to be the ending period,
E14.
comma, and then the type, we're going to go back up, capture, oops, the 0 over in cell E14. Now, hopefully we've done everything correct. Yay, matched up.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to blow it up a little bit.
I have a quick question. This is using the payment column. Is it always going to be the payment column, or is
No,
that just?
I did that just
Oh, because you didn't
because I
change
thought it
it
was the
when you
most
changed
logical
it.
column to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was trying to,
Can I use
Yeah,
this?
to-
instead
you
of
have
having to
to
put this on
go
multiple
to
sheets of
12.
paper, I was just trying
Yeah.
to
You have to
consolidate
put
stuff.
12, 30,
Okay, so maybe,
10%.
there's the formula.
Once you change that, then you can put the formula. You have to change up top first.
This one.
Yeah, go 12, 360.
This should be 360 because this multiplies that, right? So this should be 10%.
Yeah.
This should be 12, right?
No, 30.
30. And this should fix by 10, right? So it should
No,
be
just
this,
write it down, 360.
This?
Yeah. And now instead of 7.5
It
million.
doesn't have, it doesn't have that.
Okay,
sort of-
everybody got it?
Doesn't matter. Right here,
All right.
100,000.
So, just using
And now-
pure logic.
There you go. And now you do it formula.
What's the function going to be for the cumulative principal?
PMT.
Probably so.
PMT.
P-R-I-N-C. Okay? Okay, see if you can fill it in basically the same way you did the other one. On your own.
So now we do
Dr. Forgy, the formula IPMT is for principal reduction, right? Am I?
Yeah, for the interest payment only, for a specific month.
Okay.
Whereas cumulative interest calculates over a period of time.
Dr. Forgy? Can I ask you?
I got you.
Because over here, there's something wrong. So here, I don't have any formula.
No, just copy from here.
No, you have to put the equal first. So now, then you can make it a formula.
Yeah, but if I don't have the numbers here correct, I don't know what.
Yeah, it's correct. It's right. It is the same here.
What? Yeah, you put the equal in front of the
In front of the
cumulative payment, just like it was on the screen.
so equal CUM IPMT, and now you do the same formula as before. You do 10%.
Okay,
That one,
hopefully
this
you
one.
figured
This
out
is
the cumulative
not
principle,
PMT.
so let's just take a look. We're gonna go up, we can scroll, we're just gonna get the rate.
10%
What's the
divided,
difference between this and that?
because here it's
Divided
using
by-
PMT column numbers, so it has to be used this one.
Oh, okay.
Divided by 12, by
Comma,
comma.
and then 30,
Now you do 30 times 12,
that's 12,
30 times 12, comma, and now you just take the numbers that it tells you.
PE,
present
and I
value,
put 100,000.
comma,
Start period.
start, comma, end, comma,
Right here, it's start period.
Just put that in.
Number 1, yeah.
And end period. Close parentheses.
No, don't close it. You have to put the
Okay.
type.
everybody match
You have to
up?
put the type. The type
Okay,
right
once
here,
again,
the last
pop it
one.
up there.
That's comma.
And the
Type is right here. 0. No, that one. This one. You have to stay on the PMT column. Now you close it. Enter.
You have entered too few arguments for this function. Nice.
All right. Now, who can figure out how to calculate the total paid?
This those two.
How do we?
Let me see. 89,
Okay, so total paid
Yeah,
is simply going to be adding F22
20.
plus F23,
F20.
boom.
No, I already have F20.
Okay,
And F20.
20, yeah.
Now,
Yeah, correct.
Professor Forgy, the
Right?
cumulative
Now, comma.
principal is the equity that
Comma
gets
more
built
the
up
type. You have
in
to
the
write
property,
type.
right?
Right.
During that period of time.
And then you can refinance it or get an
know.
equity line.
Right. But it's, here's the thing, okay, so just keep in mind, that's for half of the loan. For the whole loan, it'll be 360 months. So it's a good way to check and see if you did everything correct. So for 360 months, the full loan term, you pay back the full $100,000 of your loan. You pay $215,000 in interest. Your total out of pocket, obviously adding those two together, is $315,000. All right? Does that make sense, everybody? Yes, no, possibly could be. All right? Now, but here's the thing. One of the things that we currently benefit from with our income tax laws, which is all going to be changing, hopefully, is the mortgage interest deduction. Okay? So for residential, your own personal properties as well as investment properties, one of the things that you get to deduct is the mortgage interest off of those properties. Okay? Well, in order to fill out your tax forms, you've got to figure out how much mortgage interest did I pay. Now, usually your lender will send you a statement that already has that calculated for you, but if you have self-financed or financed with, individuals, you're going to have to calculate on your own. All right? So in this particular case, we can simply say, okay, I want to know for the first 12 months that I own this property, how much interest did I have that I can potentially deduct from my income taxes? Well, there it is, $99.7488. Okay? And sadly, during that first year, I only paid back $555 of the loan. All the rest went to interest. Okay? Does everybody follow on that? Now, here's the thing. What if I wanted to know specifically for like a year other than year one? Maybe I wanted to know year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. Okay, so for year 2, what is it going to be? What months?
24.
2 to 24.
13 to 24. Think about that for a second. Month 13 is January of the second year. Month 12 is December of the first year. Does everybody follow that? So month 24 is December of the second year. Okay? Now this is just one of those things that you need to get this sort of stuff kind of committed to memory. Specifically, no word right. All right. So year 1, we said, is months 1 to 12. Year 2 is 13 to 24. Year 3 would be 25 to 36. Year 4 would be 37 to 48. Year 5 would be 49 to 60. Year 6 would be 61 to 72, and so forth, so on. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay? So, if I were to ask you on a quiz, tell me what is the total interest paid during year 3? What months would I use?
25 and 36.
And there you are. Make sense?
Yeah.
Nice warm fuzzy feelings? Okay. Okay, you go back and put those back at where they were, 1 and 180. So we keep all the numbers right. Okay. Balance. At the end of the period. Any idea of what we might use for this?
100,000 minus the
Not
principal.
present value,
Future value?
future value.
Yeah, because this is the end. Makes sense.
Equal future value. Okay. We've already done a future value up above, but this one's different because we're changing up what? The term. Okay? So in this case, future value, the rate, yeah, we're going to have to go, let me kind of
Zoom out.
zoom out a little bit so I can see what we're doing.
10% divided by 12.
Okay, that's the rate.
Yeah.
Interest, okay, that's the rate. Okay.
Okay.
NPR is N times
So
P.
future value,
That's easy too.
open parentheses, the rate,
Everything else is just
10% divided by 12 months, comma, number of periods. Now, at this particular point, the number of periods is going to be what? 180, or that cell reference for 180. Right there, F20. Comma, payment, we'll capture it, comma, the present value, capture it, comma, and then the type. Oops, I did something by accident there.
The type is 0. I mean,
Type is 0. Yep.
E14.
0.
And let me zoom out.
E14.
Okay.
But that, why the F20?
Because the end period that we're calculating for the amortization calculators, we're saying we want to know what the balance is at the end of month 180.
That's a little detail. Do you see the difference?
In other words, what we're telling Excel, the rate, 10% divided by 12, but the term of what we have paid, only of what we have paid, has been 180. Okay? Regardless of the fact that the loan is for 360 months, what we have paid has been 180 payments. That's the reason there's a balance, because we have paid 360. Let me show you something. Okay?
Wasn't easy to put just the cumulative principal, the PV minus the cumulative.
You could. Just a different way of doing it.
That's why he's explaining.
But if you
It's
did
telling
it that
that
way,
it is
the
F20.
problem with that is
Yeah,
if you do
I was
an
confused
intervening
also.
time period, it's only going to capture the principal paid during that time period.
If you're adding the 13.
Okay? All right. So let's just show you something. I think this will help answer your question. Okay?
Listen to it.
So, without me punching it in, what's going to happen if I type in 360 as the end period? What is going to be the balance?
0.
Should be 0. Because the loan's paid off after 360 months. Okay? If we type in, let's say, just for fun, the previous month, 359. Okay? So at month 359, we still owe
A month of term.
$870, and about $6.70 of that is interest. Okay, make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's just put that back at 180. Okay, so we match up. Okay, everybody cool, comfortable? All right.
You know how to pull this one out?
No.
It's, sum. You add these two numbers.
Some.
Okay.
Parentheses.
On this little spreadsheet, the last little thing that we've got here is the effective interest rate calculator. So this is something that in the finance class we were actually talking a little bit about today. And that is, what is your effective interest rate assuming different compounding periods? Okay? So in this case, if we've got 12 compounding periods, meaning monthly compounding, and we have a stated or nominal interest rate of 10%, what does that mean our effective interest rate is going to be? Well, let's just show this on the calculator first.
1.2%. I doubt it.
Okay, so for that setup,
How about next year?
we would have 12 payments per year.
I'm paying part-time.
Okay, and then we would put in 10 shift nominal percent. Okay, look underneath the interest rate key on the calculator. What does it say? NOM, percent.
Yeah.
Okay, then you would simply just solve for the effective rate, hit shift effective
Which is under
percent, which is right underneath the present value key, okay? So in doing that, let's just see what it tells us.
10.47.
almost like pi. Are you alright, man? Pi is like
Right.
2.14.
10.47, excuse me, 10.471306, okay, as the effective percent, all right? So now, we're gonna do this on Excel. This is just this is not an actual function, at least not the way that I'm doing it. It's not an actual function. We're gonna do it real simply, sort of by formula, okay? And why don't you tinker around with it just for a second on your own and see if you can figure it out. Matter of fact, if you've got the textbook, it shows you how to do it.
I don't have the text.
The formula, to kind of help you out a little bit, you're basically going to take the nominal percent, okay, and you are going to add to that 1.10, and then you're going to raise that to the power of 12 and divide that by 12. That's all you're doing. So see if you can figure it out.
I think it's easier to use the effect formula, but
Don't use the form.
Oh, I got 26.15.
Okay, there we go. Got it. So, there it is.
One plus S31.
But where's the... On the board, it's not -1.
Oh, I'm sorry?
On the board, you don't have -1.
Oh,
Yeah, that's why I wasn't. Oh.
okay, you got it? Okay, so let's play around with this just for a second. So just to make sure that everything's working, let's say that we change the compounding periods to 1. It should be the same. Okay? One compounding period, annual compounding, the effective rate and the nominal rate are the same. Okay, let's change it to 2 compounding periods. Okay, 3, 4, 6. What about daily compounding, 365? Or, just put a really large number there, almost continuous compounding. Okay.
5 12.
All right. We good?
Yep.
Okay, so now we've gone through putting in obviously the different values and kind of talking through the different values. What I want to do now is spend a little bit of time going back, now that we've done everything in the sense of what we've set out to do with regard to the formulas. Okay, are there any bits and pieces of this, for whatever reason, that don't make sense to you? Now is the time to get those questions out. So like, speak now or forever hold your peace. What I don't want are a bunch of emails and a bunch of phone calls and a bunch of visits. I would rather get the questions out now. Yes?
Why the -1 on that last formula?
Okay.
I just
So the
start right
question
now, it's very
was,
nice.
oops. Okay, so why on this do we have to have the -1? Well, if we take away the -1, it basically gives us 110%. Well, mathematically, what we have to do up front whenever we're doing this calculation is we've got to add 1 up here to the front in order to raise it to the exponent. And to basically remove that, once we've got it there, is we're subtracting it out. That's basically all we're doing. Yep.
Could you give us an example of using net present value to compare two properties, I guess?
Sure.
And then that's where I struggle in other classes.
Okay. It's an excellent question. So let's do this on an annual basis. Compare 2 properties side by side. Oops. Okay, so let's do this. Let's take, and I'm going to try to highlight everything here. Okay, so the question that Gayon asked is, all right, let's say that we want to compare 2 properties side by side using net present value and internal rate of return. All right, and so let's start with the assumption for the moment they both have the same purchase price. Okay, but their cash flow streams are going to be different in some way. All right, and this is an example that, actually I'm glad you brought this up because this is something that I think it's like a fundamental sort of way of thinking about investing in real estate. And specifically, would you prefer to be a slumlord, or would you prefer to be what I would call an overly conscientious investor? Those are 2 extremes. Now let me explain what I think the 2 mean, and when we're comparing, in other words, on one side, we've got, I'll even type it in up here. Slumlord. Okay? Over here, overly, I don't know if I can spell it right, but let's just say overly
Careful.
careful. Good.
Meticulous.
Meticulous. All right.
How you spell that again?
So what I mean by the slumlord, if you think about it, the slumlord is the type of person, they buy a property, and their whole investment strategy is to spend as little money as possible while they own the property, try to absorb as much operating income as they possibly can while they own the property. Now, chances are, during that ownership period, the property probably deteriorates physically because they're not maintaining it, they're not doing routine maintenance. But then ultimately, you know, after let's say 5 years, their strategy might just be, all right, at the end of that 5-year period, I'm going to sell it for whatever I can sell it for, right? Now, in many cases, slumlords tend to own it forever, but we're going to put a defining moment on this. They're going to have to sell it after 5 years. Whereas the overly conscientious, or what we call an overly careful sort of investor, the polar opposite of the slumlord, is somebody who buys a property and they feel like, for whatever reason, they need to attend to every possible conceivable need that a tenant may have or that the property may have, that so much as a scuff mark on the wall, it's going to be gone within 24 hours. You know, if somebody spills something on the carpet, they're going to have it replaced within, 24 hours. If, I mean, that level of attention. I'm not saying it's all bad. I mean, it's great if you're a tenant, but spending that amount of money potentially on maintaining the property at literally, the highest possible conceivable level is not cheap, and it's going to have an impact on your cash flow. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay, so those are two extremes, as I'm going to call them. Now, you think about this, and initially, the property starts off in both instances, same property, identical, everything is good, okay? Everything is new. So, on an annual basis, let's say that the property generates $150,000 of net operating income a year. Okay? Now, in essence, we could kind of come in here. Initially, we might say, okay, 150,000. Over here, let's say 150,000, just for the moment. But what we're actually sort of beginning to now say is, all right, of that income, how much are we spending on maintenance and repairs? Okay, we can sort of back up from that and sort of say, all right, that let's just say that the average person, average owner, would spend 150. Okay, so somewhere in between these two folks. Okay, the slumlord is probably going to figure out ways to cut out some operating expenses. Okay, so they may be able to, in essence, inflate that number to, let's say, 175. Okay? On the flip side, the overly careful person or the overly conscientious sort of investor is going to inflate the operating expenses to where this number is going to go down. In other words, they're going to be just finding anything they possibly can to fix on the property. All right? So that might go down to, let's say, I don't know, 125. Okay, does that make sense, what I'm sort of suggesting? All right? So let's say that we do that for 5 years in both instances. 175. Oops. And 125. Okay, but that's not the end of the story, okay? in this case, we're still both in negative cash flow territory. The reason is we haven't factored in a resale price, okay? And that's where it begins to get really interesting really quickly, okay? Because fundamentally, what drives the value of a property? For those of you that were in my class this morning, what fundamentally drives the value of the property? Net operating income. What has the slumlord done? They have a much higher NOI, don't they? But, whenever somebody comes and they do a property inspection, they're going to say, yeah, you've been generating $175,000 a year for the past 5 years, but the deferred maintenance on this property is ridiculous, okay? And so they're going to probably make something of a downward adjustment. In other words, they're going to probably apply a much higher cap rate to the property simply because of the quality and the state in which it's in. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
So the cap rate that they apply is not determined like based on the market or anything. It's basically...
It's going to be a property-specific cap rate because they're going to say the condition of this property is not normal.
Okay, so that's...
It's below normal. Therefore, the cap rate's going to be higher. All right? And then on the other side, they may actually say, once again, it's not normal as well. This property has been maintained to a gold standard. There's no depreciation, everything is amazing. Okay? So, but let's just kind of, and just in very simple terms, I mean, look at the purchase price. Let's just kind of use this as kind of a baseline. The original purchase price for both was $1 million. So the expectation would be if you had a normal owner, they should be able to sell it for at least what they paid for it. Probably, yes? Okay, and with a little bit of increase, okay? So let's just, for fun, let's just say that in both instances, we actually keep it at $1 million. So we're just going to add $1 million. So in other words, we're reselling the property at the end of 5 years for $1 million plus the final year cash flow. All right, so what does that do to us? Well, in this case, we get a 17.5% return as the slumlord. In this case, we're only getting a 12.5% return as the conscientious investor. Okay, now what one would hope in terms of market realities would be, well, this number might get knocked down a little bit from that $1 million mark to maybe, I don't know, let's just say we take 175,000 off of it, we just get back 1 million. And then over here, we sort of say, okay, well that final year, we take and we add maybe another 125,000, so 1,250,000. So we've added a little bit here, we've taken away a little bit here. We're getting pretty darn close to the same returns. Yes? In terms of the internal rate of return, 14.9 versus 14.38. So if we just simply take this, just once again, this is not obviously absolute numbers, but the point is, under this scenario, we would be inclined to say it pays more to be a slumlord. With the assumptions that we've made, Now, you've got to sort of say, well, at some point, how low would we have to go? If we went down to 900,000, okay, that's low enough with the resale price and last year's cash flow to actually show that our percentage is lower than overly careful investor. Does that make sense? So the whole idea of what I'm trying to get you to sort of think about is that it's not absolute that one of these two extreme strategies is going to be, under all circumstances and conditions, better than the other. it really, it depends on, there could be other intervening factors. Like the market itself has gone up in such a rapid pace that the fact that property is a piece of junk now because it's been run into the ground may not matter that much because it's really the land value that's driving the property, okay? Whereas on the other side, it could be, once again, this overly conscientious investor or that they put so much money into this that it just doesn't make any sense, in terms of the rate of return that they're able to generate because it's substantially below what maybe other similar properties are generating. And they're never going to maybe be able to realize the full value of it because they're over fixing everything. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if we sort of flow on down a little bit more and we look at the discount rate and we kind of look at what the NPV is, then here what we're basically saying is if our hurdle rate, and this is a key word to use, hurdle rate. It means the rate that we've got to jump over, okay? Just like a hurdle in a race, okay? So the hurdle rate is that bottom threshold number that we have personally set as an investor, owner, operator, whatever it might be, for us to own and operate a property. Now 5% is pretty low. I would argue, let's say, maybe let's raise that a little bit, I don't know, to 10%.
What does that mean? What does the discount rate mean? I mean,
it just simply means that is the minimum rate that we desire as the owner of the property,
okay,
in order for us to feel as though we have been adequately compensated for the risk and for everything that we've undertaken with respect to this property. Now, once again, it's different from one person to the next.
Could it be called management fee?
No, it's not a management fee. Management fee is a totally different thing. Management fee is simply an operations sort of fee. This is dealing with, I've got $100. I want to put that $100 into a real estate investment.
Correct.
I demand that at the end of the year, I get paid $15 of interest or on that $100, 15% rate of return.
Okay.
Okay? Anything less than 15%,
not acceptable.
I'm not happy.
Right.
Okay? So that's your hurdle rate. I've set the hurdle rate now to 15%. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, now, this is a good thing to sort of illustrate here. The property, under these conditions, right now, is generating a 13.28% return. Does that meet my hurdle rate? Yes or no?
No.
No. Well, that obviously is shown down here because now I've got a negative net present value. So what that's saying is that I am not meeting my hurdle rate, and in fact, I'm about $52,000 shy in terms of income in order to meet that hurdle rate of 15%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now,
all you have to do is add 60,000 up top.
yeah, if we add some more money up top, that can all change. But if we also just sort of say, well, maybe our hurdle rate is too high at 15%, maybe we should make it 12%. Okay? And if we're happy with 12%, then what we're now saying is, okay, we're still generating a 13% return there and a 14% return there, but we've set our new threshold as an investor for 12%. We have jumped over that hurdle of 12%, and we are generating positive extra cash flow above the 12% of $42,000.
Right.
Now, this is the part that hopefully, if that doesn't quite make it sink in, this next piece will. What if I were to make the discount rate 13.28%? Without pushing the enter key, what's going to happen?
Break even.
Pretty darn close to break even. Okay? Because that's, in essence, and the only reason it's not precisely is, once again, because of rounding. Okay? But in other words, by putting in the exact return that we are receiving on the two properties as our discount rate, that means that our net present value should be pretty darn close to zero. It should be exactly zero, but it's not because of rounding, okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay? So in this particular case, what we're saying is, okay, we have come within $4 of precisely meeting our hurdle rate or our discount rate of 13.28%. Matter of fact, if we were to change it just ever so slightly to 13.27, just to sort of show, then yeah, see right there, and 14.37. Okay? Because now we're ever so slightly below that hurdle rate, or we're ever so slightly above the hurdle rate with our internal rate of return, therefore we are generating a minuscule sort of dollar return beyond the required hurdle rate. Here's what you gotta kind of put into your head. It's kind of like saying, all right, I demanded that, whatever it was, 15% rate of return. And then after I've paid you the $15, then I've got a few extra dollars that the project actually earned that I can throw in your direction. And that is kind of your net present value. The term net present value implies that you've got to subtract out the original investment to figure out what you have left over.
Is there, like, let's say for a more simple equation, is there a way to set what your net present value is in this equation and kind of like work backwards from there? I'm just saying in this formula right here. Let's say if I want to net 500,000 from this, should I put that in there?
Well, yeah, like for example, okay, if you wanted to net 500,000, then the simple way would be pretty much just to start adjusting your discount rate. So if we go to a 5% discount rate, that doesn't quite get us there. We go to a 3%, gets us closer. 2% gets us even closer. 1%, okay, gets us there. 1.15, and so forth, so on. You can play the high-low game until you get precisely right there at whatever 500,000 or whatever it is that you want to walk away with. But now what that's saying in this case is that you've set your hurdle rate at this ridiculously low level, okay, in order to achieve that. Because here's why the hurdle rate matters. It's not just that you want to pay yourself back. You probably may also want to pay back it's not the mortgage, but you may want to pay back, once again, you know, from a kind of an investment perspective, you're wanting to pay back yourself an appropriate rate of return commensurate with all the risk that you've undertaken. And then, once again, you're sort of satisfied with that percentage, and then whatever else you make, cash money on top of that, is gravy, is what you're really saying.
You need to have a bigger rate return than the discount rate. Like, okay, I'm looking for 15%, but with 10% I'm fine. Something like that.
Yeah. Like I say, for every person, every institution, every investment, it's different. You're going to find, like for example, nonprofits. They're going to do a pro forma on something, and their whole thing is as long as it breaks even, that's all that really matters. There's not really any sort of rate of return that they're really seeking. Okay. Whereas with an individual, you may simply say, I've got to earn 10% on my money every year or I'm not going to be happy. Whereas you might say, I've got to earn 15% of my money every year and I'm not going to be happy. Or you may say 20%. Or you may go to an institutional player and they may say, we're happy with 11%. Or you may go to somebody else. I mean, it's just, it's not an absolute number. This is why, in many cases, that with all the different players that you have in the marketplace, certain players automatically get priced out of the market because they are not able to, number one, access as cheap of a source of capital as somebody else, and number two, be able to deliver a particular return to their investors. And so, for example, I mean, the perfect scenario is you have found an incredibly low cost of borrowing from whatever lender or source of capital is out there, and you have found an angel set of investors that have no desire for any sort of rate of return on their investment whatsoever. That is nirvana. You know, that is the perfect sort of scenario, because that pretty much means you can invest in almost anything and pay almost any price for a property, pay a higher price than everybody else in the market. But the naked reality is that maybe you as an individual, you're only able to borrow money at 6%, whereas those folks are able to borrow money at 3%. That automatically prices you out of the market for that particular product type. That is why also that when you look at a lot of the major players, they're focused on larger properties, larger deals, because for them, the brain damage of going through the due diligence process for a big property is really almost the same as it is the brain damage for a smaller property. And they've got a lot more cost that they've got, a lot more overhead that they've got to cover, you know, with that due diligence for those larger properties. That's why they're pretty much limited to the larger properties. Whereas a smaller player can maybe get around not having to maybe do all that same sort of due diligence, and may be able to find a market niche of buying, you know, mid-size apartments or, you know, office buildings or, you know, whatever it might be, and still compete because they're chasing a much different type of deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, other questions? Good question, yeah. Did I answer? Nothing else? By the way, this doesn't mean you're going to need to go early, so don't get that in the back of your mind. There's other stuff I can talk about. So, other questions that you've got?
Can you give us an example of how you would put together your discount rate? You know, like with just investors, like just a hypothetical.
Yes, I can do that. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So the question was, how do we basically come up with a discount rate? The way that I tend to think about this is very similar to, how many of you, by the way, undergrads in finance? You know, at least one or two of you. Okay, so one. All right. And so you remember something in finance called WACC. Weighted average cost of capital. You remember that, Robert? RJ?
Yeah, I remember the acronym. I don't
Okay.
remember what it's
That's all you remember.
Yeah.
Okay. Weighted average cost of capital. What does that sort of imply? That means that you've got more than one source of capital. Yes? Okay, for a traditional real estate deal, we've got at least two sources of capital at a minimum. We've got debt and we've got equity. Yes? Debt is what we borrow from the bank, equity is what we get from investors. Yes? Right. Okay? Now we may have additional sources of capital coming from mezzanine financing or coming from, you know, alternative sources, but let's just start with the debt and equity part. Okay? So what you're going to find is this sort of weighted average cost of capital as we said, are going to have two sides to it. the debt side and the equity side. And on the debt side, first of all, the first question that we need to address is what is going to be our capital structure. Now, what I mean by that, in terms of what is going to be our capital structure, that means, in other words, what's going to be basically our loan-to-value ratio, okay? In other words, what percentage are we going to borrow? What percentage are we going to invest ourselves in a form of equity? That's our capital structure. Also, could be called the debt stack, equity stack. You know, there's a whole number of terms that potentially sort of relate to that. But capital structure is the normal. So in this case, one of the things that we talked about earlier today in the other class was a lender and how much they might lend you in terms of a percentage. We talked about loan-to-value ratios. Okay? Well, if on the debt side, they're willing to loan you a loan-to-value ratio of 80%, then that means you have to come up with what percent equity? 20. So basically, the percent equity, if you will, is going to be 20%. Everybody still with me? All right. Now, is it starting to look familiar, RJ?
Yeah.
Okay. So what am I going to fill in here with the remaining two blanks? My cost of debt and my cost of equity. Okay? So my cost of debt is, let's say, on an after-tax basis, my after-tax cost of debt might be 5%. Okay? Whereas my cost of equity, or I might actually refer to it as my return on equity, this is my hurdle rate with respect to just the equity piece. Okay? And so that might be, I don't know, 15%. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? Yes or no? Okay? So, what that means is to get this weighted average cost of capital, we've got to do this math. That we're basically saying that 80% of the project is being financed with a cost of 5% debt. The remaining 20% of the project is being financed with a 15% cost of equity. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Now, once again, if you just think about this without actually doing the math, my overall weighted average cost of capital is going to be what? Higher than 5%, lower than 15%. Yes? It's got to be. Okay, you follow what I'm saying? In other words, at the high end, we've got 15%. At the low end, we've got 5%. So it's going to be somewhere in the middle. Now, which side do you think it's going to be more skewed to?
5%.
5%, because it represents 80% of the capital structure. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's do the math. So our weighted average cost of capital is 7%. Okay? Now, to get to Jarvis's question. Basically what this is saying is if this is the capital structure that we have put together on a real estate deal, where that's our cost of debt and that's our return on equity, our required return on equity, then what we're saying is our minimum hurdle rate would need to be 7% or higher in order to pay everybody back and break even. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be purely satisfied completely with just that 7% weighted average cost of capital. It means that we've broken even. If we want, obviously, we're not going to be satisfied with anything less than that because we're basically going to be losing money. So it needs to be something north of that for us to be happy. Now, how much more north of that? You know, that's for you to sort of determine. But at the minimum, that would have to be your sort of threshold. Did that answer the question? Okay, now what about the rest of you? Dustin, thoughts? Okay. I mean, does it make sense to everybody or not? Okay. Now, as I said, you can complicate it up quite a bit in terms of adding other sources of capital in the mix. For example, one of the things that you've heard me mention was mezz financing. Okay? Mezzanine financing, mezz finance. If you don't believe me, Google it, okay? Mezzanine financing is kind of a middle ground financing. It's maybe not quite equity, not quite debt. It's basically kind of a hybrid sort of thing. In finance terms, it's kind of like preferred stock. Now, the idea behind mezzanine financing is, it's also another term for it, gap financing. Okay, would be another term. Because what it potentially does is, like, for example, the lender tells you they require a loan-to-value ratio of 80%, meaning you've got to come up with 20% equity. But you're saying, I don't have 20% equity. Where am I going to get 20% equity? Where am I going to get that money? Friends, family, you know, whatever. Well, with mezzanine financing, what it would mean is you can go out, find an alternative source of financing that's not a traditional lender, that's going to be looking for probably a higher rate of return than this, but maybe lower than that. And so what you might be able to do is, you, as the developer, you might only have to put in, let's say, 5%. So if you got 5% of your own money, 15% of mezzanine finance money, and then 80% of traditional lender money, that might be your structure. Does that make sense?
So basically, if it's like an 80% LTV and you can only come up with 10%, you would go to the mezzanine financer to get the other 10?
Precisely.
What is like a real world company that isn't?
There is not like, there's a whole bunch, but they're all like boutique-y, I guess would be the right, you know, I mean, they're all very, a lot of them is high net worth individuals. They just simply put literally a shingle out there. In many cases, it may even be managed by their CPA. In other instances, there are mezzanine players that do specialize specifically in a particular product type, a particular market, and actually can provide expertise, you know, about that particular type of product, almost like a venture capital sort of approach. But yeah, you can, once again, you can pretty much just Google mezzanine finance and you'll like pull up a whole laundry list of folks, most of which you've never heard of.
So in this instance, instead of having to pay back the mezzanine financing company and the bank, for instance, I guess, why wouldn't you just do a 90% LTV loan to a bank?
Oh my God, I love that question. All right. The lenders are usually constrained by their board of directors as to what percentage they can loan out as a loan to value.
Right.
Okay? And the reason for that is because it's a risk thing.
Right.
And lenders, traditional lenders, are pretty risk adverse with respect to kind of their lending policies. And so basically, with an 80% loan to value ratio, they're sort of saying, all right, bad things could happen in the market, the property could go down by 20% in value, and we're not going to be hurt. We're still going to be able to cash out of the property and hopefully not lose any money as a traditional lender, okay? But if we raise that threshold from, let's say, 80 to 90%, the market goes down by a little bit, there's a greater chance that they're going to get hurt.
Yeah.
They're simply they're not willing to take on that risk, especially for the really low interest rate that they're potentially charging you. Now, what could happen with some lenders is that they would do a blended rate. And they would basically say, all right, we are going to offer you the first 80% at 5%, but then that next 10% or 15%, we're going to offer to you at a much higher interest rate because we are concerned that if the property does default, that is going to be a loss.
So who would be, like, say in that instance where you're splitting that 20% with the mezzanine financer, say everything goes underwater, now is
The
that
mezzanine
mezzanine, they're
you're
also
going to be
liable?
hurt first
Right,
as the equity player.
yeah.
Then the next in line is going to be the mezz player, followed by then the senior debt.
And now for that reason, do mezzanine financers charge a higher interest rate?
Absolutely.
Because they're liable?
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
And that's the whole kind of point of this is that, and we're getting into this within the next week or so in the finance class, but whenever lenders are pricing debt, you know, they're looking at all these different sort of characteristics, not just of the borrower, but of the tenants, you know, behind those borrowers, and, you know, saying, what is the likelihood of default? What is the likelihood that, you know, for whatever reason, that we would ever end up with this property again, and then trying to sort of price that into the debt. But, you know, what actually sort of takes place is you're going to see something almost like this, that if this is our overall loan-to-value sort of ratio of sorts, and you're probably going to see, let's say, our cost of borrowing, oops, actually that's not what I want to do, cost of borrowing over here. And do loan-to-value over here. Okay, so maybe up to, let's say, a 50% loan-to-value ratio, we're willing to give you a 5% interest rate. And then let's say that all of a sudden, you decide to go up to a 6% level, okay, cost of borrowing, and that is ultimately going to be maybe taking it to, I don't know, let's just say 70% loan-to-value. Okay, but then all of a sudden you go beyond, let's say 70%, and it may go up dramatically more because more risk. And then as you really approach 100%, it goes up even higher. So in other words, let's say that's sort of 70, maybe this is 80% loan to value, and this over here is pretty darn close to 100% loan to value. So while that's maybe 5 or 6, this might be, I don't know, 8 or 9, and this up here might be 15%. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That the general thought process from the lender's perspective is up to 50%, we're not going to lose anything. You know, if the property goes bankrupt or, you know, closes down, the market falls apart, we can certainly sell it for 50% of the original value of the property. But as we sort of incrementally start going up with higher and higher sort of loan to value ratios, then we've got to factor in an additional risk premium in terms of the interest rate or the rate of return that we're going to generate. And it's not necessarily going to be the case that we're even talking about traditional lenders. There are so many different sources of capital out there for real estate.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously one of the newest entrants over the past few years is what? Crowdfunding. You know, you can hop online, put together a proposal, you know, pop it up on the internet, and potentially get all sorts of folks from all over the country, all over the world investing in your real estate deal, okay, for better or for worse.
I almost worked for a mezzanine financer where they did this exact same thing, but except for paying whatever that 10%, they found like, they split their 10% in half, and essentially they found like government funding.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do it and structure it.
Smart.
Okay. All right, other questions? Great question. That did answer it, yes?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay.
Could
Okay.
mezzanine financers, are they limited to just, I guess in this instance, mortgages? Like, for instance, like if you had one property and you were 90% paid off and you wanted to buy another property.
Oh my God, yes, this is good stuff. Okay.
Could you then go to the mezzanine financer to pay off your previous?
Yep, or you can do what is called a cross-collateralization loan.
Yeah.
Now these are fascinating situations of where, let's say that you own multiple properties, okay? And one of the first instances I ever saw with this was back in Dallas several years ago. You had one of the Dallas Cowboys who owned a whole set of Burger King franchises, okay? And so he had all of these Burger King franchises cross-collateralized. And so let's say that he had 20 Burger King franchises, all right? Well, as you can expect, not all franchises perform equally. You know, one is absolutely stellar. Another, not so much, not making any money, losing money, okay? Well, with cross-collateralization, what you do is you basically say, I'm going to pledge all 20 of my franchises in tandem to secure a real estate loan, okay? And the idea is that hopefully all 20 will be able to support the level of debt that you're taking on for those properties. But if you were to do each one individually, the lender would view that as being more risky.
Yeah.
Because if they're singularly financed, then they've got to look very close at the operating performance of every single one with a fine-tooth comb and sort of say, well, this one on this part of town is not doing all that great, or not expected to do all that great. This one over here is doing really well. But by blending them all together, the lender is basically saying, okay, yeah, we're going to allow this cross-collateralization, and we're maybe going to give you a lower interest rate because of that cross-collateralization.
Yeah.
But the downside is if several of those Burger Kings start to blow up in the sense of not do well in their performance, then you could have a situation of where a handful of them could bring down the whole empire all at once. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. I mean, you can get some real benefits as a borrower for having that cross-collateralization, but in the event that, once again, several of them do blow up, then you're left with, you know, a much bigger problem of your whole empire goes down.
Is there a rule of thumb when doing that, when you cross collateral, right? Like, can I, like, if I have those Burger Kings, right?
Yep.
And let's say I go look for a property, am I looking for something with like similar returns, or you kind of get where I'm going at with it?
Well, normally, I mean, okay, let's put it this way. You can cross-collateralize anything.
Right.
I mean, it's like you can cross-collateralize an apartment complex with an office building, with a shopping center, with a whatever.
Right.
Now, as a general rule, if you're cross-collateralizing virtually the same asset, like I was talking with Burger King's, they're all the same product type, so the analysis is going to be virtually identical for each one. The operating performance metrics are going to be virtually identical for each one. Therefore, it's a fairly easy sort of analysis. But if you start cross-collateralizing assets that are very different from each other, then that's going to require probably a bit more due diligence on the part of the lender to investigate the backgrounds of each of those property types and to be able to more accurately come up with, you know, what the total portfolio value is and kind of what the metrics are for performance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Anybody else?
It's just a general question. A residential loan, is it mortgage? For commercial, is there another term for it? Is it still mortgage?
No, the difference is they're both mortgages. But the difference is in terms of the protection mechanisms that are in place. With residential mortgages, the government has put into place all sorts of safeguards to try to keep the average ordinary person from being taken advantage of by unscrupulous lenders, okay? And it doesn't always work, but they have tried to put in all these different sort of safeguards to try to ensure that doesn't happen. Whereas with commercial mortgage, and there's also a lot more intervention in the residential mortgage market because the federal government has historically wanted to try to promote home ownership. And part of the idea there is that if people are homeowners, they're going to be more than likely to be invested in their communities and take care of their homes and all this other, you know, stability, yada, 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 okay? Well, on the commercial side of the business, there's never been that level of engagement by the government with respect to oversight and control.
Yeah.
And so with commercial loans, it's a whole different sort of process. I mean, it's in the sense that you're not having to inherently be worried about every little detail. It's a very much of a buyer beware kind of scenario with the borrowers. That the general idea is that they're going to be sophisticated players and that they're going to hopefully know what they're doing and not get themselves in trouble. But the reality is they may not be any more sophisticated than some of the residential borrowers, but yet the government treats them as if, okay, you're a business owner, you're a commercial property owner,
You're on your own.
you're on your own, kind of, that you don't have to invest in commercial property. The thought process is with residential, you've got to have a place to live. And so therefore, there's a bit more of kind of the government sort of oversight with the residential property markets. I mean, Dustin, do you have any additional perspective on that? Okay. So, but with, I mean, the other piece that on the commercial side of the market, the value is driven almost exclusively by the income from the property.
Yeah.
And then this is another thing to sort of think of. If you look at valuation for residential versus commercial, and you've got three approaches to value. You've got the cost approach, you've got the income approach, and you've got the sales comparison approach. Okay? The cost approach is based on what is the construction cost of the property that you're trying to set a value for. How much did it cost me to build that property plus my cost of land?
Yeah.
Okay? With the income approach, which is predominantly what's used for commercial properties, all the value is really derived from what are the rental revenues the property generates on an annual basis. Whereas the sales comparison approach, primarily used for residential, is all about finding a similar property. It's not income based at all. It's finding a similar property with similar attributes and saying, oh, it sold for $500,000 with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a swimming pool in this neighborhood. So therefore, this property that has virtually the same identical characteristics, it's going to sell for $500,000 or should be valued at that.
Right.
And it's not driven by what it could rent out for on a monthly basis. It's not driven by necessarily how much it cost. It's driven by just simply what people are willing to pay based upon perceptions.
Is that the least accurate of all the valuation? Because I
don't
feel
know.
like you hear that when you're selling your house, for instance, and you just, maybe someone down the street has an open house, so you just go and see what the asking price is and base your...
Yeah, it's the most fraught with perception manipulation, because so much of the residential market is driven by emotion, driven by basically, sort of how they feel about a property, okay? How does it feel whenever they walk into it? How does it feel whenever you go out in the backyard? And a lot of other attributes that are more, kind of qualitative. What sort of school district is it in? What sort of neighborhood? And what's the crime statistics? What are, what does the landscaping look like? Is there a homeowners association? And all this other tangential stuff that really has nothing to do with, once again, how much it might generate in rental income on the open market.
Right.
Whereas on the commercial side, it's totally without emotion, totally without, any sort of that same type of perception. Well, it's different. I mean, it's all driven by the numbers. Now, there sure are a few kind of exceptions, like with office properties, that, you get a tenant that wants to be located in the nicest office space to present an image and that sort of thing. But you know, barring, you know, that sort of thing, it's very much of a numbers-driven sort of valuation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Whereas the cost approach, anybody have any idea what the cost approach would probably be the most relevant for?
Something that's irregular.
Like new
Yeah,
construction.
something unusual, a lot of times like government uses, schools, city halls, churches, that sort of thing, where there's not necessarily a revenue stream associated with it and not really a lot of sales comparables. It's just kind of like, okay, it costs that much, okay, that's how much it's worth, sort of thing.
They're not trying to make money off it.
Right. Now, this next sort of insight as it relates to these three approaches, I think is really valuable, because which one of these would you say is historical? Sales comparison. Because what are you doing? You're looking at historical past information, yes? Which one is future looking?
Income.
Absolutely. Because you're basically trying to predict what the income stream for a commercial property is going to be. And then whereas the cost approach, to a certain extent, is the present. Okay?
Is there an approach that combines them all somehow?
Well, no, what you do is you basically come up with a value estimate for each of the three approaches, and then you do what's called a reconciliation process, which is in essence to try to place maybe a bit more weight on the one that's probably most directly relevant to the property type, but still take into consideration information from the other approaches.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Go for it.
I have one more. I guess it's a little bit off topic. I've just heard the term bridge loan be thrown around, I guess, in real estate.
Yep.
What is a bridge loan?
Pretty much, I mean, it's kind of gap financing. It's sort of, it's not quite mezzanine, but it's sort of to take you maybe from the construction loan into a permanent loan in some cases. Because, okay, normally you have a situation of where whenever you are, as a developer, you are building a property and you obtain a construction loan, all right? And that construction loan, as a general rule, is going to be kind of, in many cases, an interest-only loan. You're not actually paying back the principal, you're just simply paying interest payments while the construction process ensues. And in some cases, you may not even have to do that. In some cases, depending on your credit, you may not have to be able to pay a lump sum kind of at the end once the construction is done or close to being done. Okay, there's a variety of different ways it can be structured. Okay. Usually, your construction lender is not the same as your permanent lender. Permanent lender is the lender that gives you a mortgage. Okay, because think about it. The lender that you have with a construction loan, they're much more involved with, they're coming out, they're doing site visits and site inspections. They're seeing that the work has been done. They're seeing that a slab has been poured, that the plumbing has been put in, that the electrical is being done, that their permits are being pulled, that everybody's, that everything is progressing as it should. Okay, it's a much more intensive sort of oversight process by the construction lender. And usually the construction lender is going to be a local lender that, because of that, they're going to be much more involved in the day-to-day kind of, seeing what's going on. Now, what should happen is once your property gets to a certain level of completion, you should be able to get what is referred to as a takeout commitment, which is basically the construction lender saying, we want to ensure that there is a permanent lender out there waiting to basically fund this project, okay? And that we're not going to be left hanging at the end of this, with having funded all the construction and there not be a permanent lender willing to actually lend you on the property, because that would be utter disaster for both the construction lender and for the borrower, because the construction lender is probably going to charge you a much higher interest rate than the permanent lender is going to charge you.
I'm just confused. Why would you go to another lender? Are you saying the construction loan lender doesn't incorporate
In some
the
cases,
time after?
they don't do the permanent lending, or their cost affiliated with doing permanent lending may not be as competitive as other players that are out there and available in the market. But you may find a national permanent lender that is willing to offer you a much better deal structure all the way around than any of the local lenders might be able to achieve.
So let me get this straight. Construction loan is just a loan to physically build the building. The next one is for, takes into consideration the time until all units, I guess, are sold.
Pretty much. I mean,
Like the operating expenses that come with selling the property, essentially.
if we're talking about specifically a loan for, let's say, a shopping center, an office building, or multifamily residential, okay, then the normal thing is you're going to get a construction loan. Sometimes at the same time you get the construction loan, or maybe sometime thereafter, a takeout commitment is going to be required by the construction lender to prove that you've got a permanent lender waiting for you at the end of the construction period, once you've achieved maybe, the metrics are all a little bit different. In some cases, it's once your certificate of occupancy has been achieved. It could also be based upon a certain percentage of the units have been leased. It could also be some other metric that is required by the permanent lender in order to take out the construction lender out of the deal. But what happens in a number of cases is that whatever that threshold might be, like for example, the threshold could very well be, you've got to be 75% pre-leased before the permanent lender will step in and take out the construction lender. Because the permanent lender doesn't want to get stuck with a property that's only, let's say, 30% pre-leased. Because they're saying, we don't want to be in a situation of where you're not going to be able to pay your mortgage payment. So therefore, we're going to require 75% pre-leasing or some other metric that they come up with as the sort of takeout commitment. Yep.
What about collateral and guarantees for construction loans?
Yeah. I mean, the typical approach is if you can bring the land into the deal free and clear, then that's usually sufficient to be the collateral for the construction lender, because they can sort of say, okay, look, you get midway through this construction mess or whatever happens, we've got the land that we can basically take possession of in the event of a default for whatever reason. And so that has traditionally been kind of the collateral that gets sort of built into it. So it's usually not going to be the case that you're going to be able to come in and finance the land and get a construction loan on top of that, unless you've got maybe, like for example, let's assume that I own the land free and clear. You come to me as a developer and say, okay, I want to partner with you. You own the land free and clear. We're going to get this construction loan. We're going to use your land as collateral. And in return, any and all income associated with the property once it's complete is going to flow back to me first. And then once I'm fully paid and satisfied, then you potentially would be able to capture whatever return.
And would a construction loan lender be okay putting out a construction loan that's the value's a lot higher than this, the land might be worth?
And that's, once again, it's going to be totally dependent, on just how valuable really that land is. That, like for example, if the land is worth 20% of the overall project value, that may be sufficient for the lender to sort of say, okay, that's your equity, in terms of for the construction loan and for the permanent loan for that matter, okay? But, maybe if now Florida it's a little bit different because usually the land value is a pretty high percentage of the overall project value, relative to, other parts of the country where it may only be 10% or 5%. But here, it's probably not uncommon, for 30 or so percent of the value of the property to be tied up with the land cost.
That makes sense.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Are we doing on time? 3:30. Okay. All right. So 30 more minutes of questions and then 30 minutes for the quiz. So, questions? Nobody?
Okay, let's say in this example right here, right? Where you have the land and let's say you don't own it all the way out, but you don't have like traditional financing on the land.
Okay.
Like let's say if the land seller finance or something like that, right?
Yep.
Do the construction lenders, do they look at that as regular financing? Like how do they look at that financing?
So the question, if I'm understanding it, is what if you have engaged in like a contract for deed or some other sort of seller financing sort of situation, and how is a lender potentially going to look at that? I mean, as long as everything has been recorded and everybody sort of, everything is sort of an arm's length transaction, everybody sort of understands what's going on, an independent, valuation of the land has been made and that sort of thing, there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay,
I
so
mean,
it's not looked at as regular financing.
well, I mean, if it's fairly straightforward, the lender's probably not going to have a problem with it. But if there's some, and I can't just off the top of my head just think of something really wacky and strange, but to the point that it is, that could pose a problem with the lender being comfortable with it in terms of providing the permanent financing, or for that matter, the construction loan. But it is not uncommon at all for many developers to partner with the landowners in order to make a deal happen. Because in many cases, the landowner might just simply be, an individual, family, whatever, that's owned the land for forever and a day, and they're not real estate developers. They don't have any sort of